afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar and thank you for joining us. We'll be starting shortly. At this time, we'll be conducting an audio check. Could the JFS panelists attending this session please confirm you have audio? All participants, please stand by. We'll be starting shortly. Welcome to the Ohio Electronic Child Care, Ohio ECC Provider Informational Session. My name is Dan and I'll be conducting the webinar today. During this session, you will learn about Ohio ECC and how it applies to you as a child care provider serving families receiving publicly funded child care. Throughout this presentation, you can ask a question using 4 easy steps. First, click on the question mark icon located in the WebEx toolbar. You should see that in the lower right corner of your screen unless you've moved it. For step 2, be sure to keep the All Panelists option selected so that your question will be sent to all of our panelists joining us today. Type your question in the empty box, and then step 4, simply click on the Send button. Your question will only go to our panelists and will not be sent to all other conference attendees. Questions will be collected during the webinar today and answered in writing on the JFS Child Care website within 3 days. Today we'll be doing an overview of the Ohio ECC system. We'll review the role of the caretaker and the role of the provider. We'll talk about preparation for the installation of your point of service device. We'll also discuss the detailed information you'll now have access to through the new provider website called PWeb. We'll talk about how you can help with the Ohio ECC system, and finally, we'll review timelines. If you printed a copy of this slideshow presentation, you can use it to take notes and can refer to it as we go through the slides. Some common terms that you'll hear throughout the presentation are explained on the following slides. ODJFS is the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services. This is the agency that supervises publicly funded child care, including Ohio ECC. CDJFS is the County Department of Job and Family Services. This is the local agency that administers publicly funded child care. CCIDS is the Child Care Information Data System. It's pronounced KIDS. It's the statewide automated system that includes the following subsystems: eligibility and authorization, centralized payments, KIDS Provider Portal, and Ohio Electronic Child Care. In Ohio rule, the caretaker is the parent or person in the home who has the responsibility for the child. The POS or POS device is the point of service device that caretakers use to swipe their card through. Backswipe. This feature is the ability for caretakers to record previous attendance transactions occurring within the current week plus the previous 2 weeks. The PWeb is the provider website. It's a secure internet site with detailed information about attendance and transaction information gathered by the POS. It's also the location to view authorization reports, to view detailed payment reports, as well as to report absences. IVR stands for Interactive Voice Response System. For Ohio ECC, there are 2 separate IVR systems. First, the Caretaker IVR is the automated feature of the Ohio ECC Caretaker Helpline. It's a toll-free telephone system reserved for caretakers. This IVR uses voice prompts which allow the caller to enter information on their touch-tone keypads. The second IVR system is the Provider IVR. This is the automated feature of the Ohio ECC Provider Helpline. It's also a toll-free telephone system, but reserved for providers. This IVR uses voice prompts which allow the caller to enter provider information on their touchtone keypads. The CSR, or Customer Service Representative, is a live person on the phone who can help answer questions when a parent or a provider calls an Ohio ECC helpline. A CSR is available to IVR callers from either the caretaker IVR or the provider IVR using separate IVR toll-free numbers. Let's review Ohio ECC. What is Ohio ECC? Ohio ECC is an automated time and attendance system. It's managed using a POS device and a magnetic stripe card. Caretakers use a swipe card to report attendance each day. The data collected by the POS device is transmitted to the Ohio ECC system for verification of benefits and to calculate payments to the provider. Affiliated Computer Services, or ACS, is the vendor selected by ODJFS through a competitive bid process to manage Ohio ECC. ACS has proven training experience in several states with other ECC projects. ACS currently has 10 states using the ECC system, including Ohio. What are the benefits for the provider? Ohio ECC automates the collection of attendance data. It allows for real-time transaction data to be made available to providers. It allows the provider to access attendance records and reports through the POS device or point of service device and the provider website. Providers will receive weekly payments once they're using the Ohio ECC system. Additional benefits include a reduction in errors and improper payments and a reduction of manual invoice processing. What's going to change with Ohio ECC? Ohio ECC gives caretakers the responsibility for reporting child care attendance using their swipe card with their provider's point of service device. Providers have access to real-time transaction information, authorization, attendance, and payment reports. Ohio ECC automates payment calculation and reduces paper invoicing. Providers are paid weekly. Weekly co-payments are assigned to caretakers, and a manual claims process has been developed for services outside the back swipe period. What will stay the same? ODJFS will continue to license providers. The County Department of Job and Family Services will continue to certify Type B providers and in-home aides. The CDJFS will manage overpayments and underpayments as they do now. Caretakers will continue to contact the county for assistance with eligibility. Caretakers and providers will continue to receive notices. Providers will continue to complete a provider agreement using the Kids Provider Portal, and providers will continue to report absences. So who's going to use Ohio ECC? Caretakers will use the system to report their child's attendance. Providers will use Ohio ECC to collect attendance data, to record absences, and to view and download reports. State and county workers will use Ohio ECC to manage caretaker participation in the program, to assist caretakers and providers with information, to process manual claims and authorization level adjustments, and to communicate with providers using broadcast messages that are printed on the POS receipt. Tools that are used in Ohio ECC for the caretaker include the swipe card pictured here and the caretaker helpline IVR. For providers, there's the POS device, the provider website, also known as the PWeb. There's also the provider helpline IVR. For state and county workers, there's an administrative terminal which provides the option for sending broadcast messages. Finally, the Kids Help Desk is available for assistance. The equipment required for Ohio ECC is the Ohio ECC swipe card pictured here on the left, and the POS device also pictured here on the right. The point of service device is installed at provider locations. Providers with active authorizations for children will receive a POS device. Caretakers will receive swipe cards. The POS device is located with the child care provider, and providers cannot swipe or back swipe for caretakers. One POS device is installed for every 50 children authorized to a specific provider. A caretaker can use any of the POS devices installed at their provider location. Specific children are not assigned to specific POS devices. Providers can request additional devices at their expense. A provider equipment agreement is completed between ACS and the provider on the care of the POS. The equipment agreement outlines normal wear and tear or defects on the POS. If there is a defect with the POS, the provider can call the Ohio ECC Provider Helpline, and a new device will be sent with a postage-paid package to return any defective POS device. The new POS device will be mailed within 48 hours of this request. The provider, if they relocate, can simply keep the same POS device. Let's talk about caretakers and how Ohio ECC works for them. So what have caretakers been told about Ohio ECC? The primary caretaker is issued 2 cards. All other caretakers on the case are issued 1 card. The caretaker can choose someone as a designee to use their card. The designee, however, cannot be the provider or anyone acting on the provider's behalf. After getting the card, the caretaker must activate their card and select their secure 4-digit personal identification number or PIN by calling a toll-free number. If the card is lost, stolen, or damaged, ACS will replace the card. There are penalties to providers for possession or use of the card, and there are penalties to families for leaving the card with the provider. Caretakers will report attendance using a swipe card and the POS device. The cardholder will swipe the card through the device, enter their 4-digit PIN, and then the cardholder will select one of the options shown on the POS device. Options include check-in, check-out, previous check-in, or previous check-out. The cardholder will enter their child's 2-digit number and will then press the Enter key. Additional children can be entered at the same time. The cardholder will press the Enter key again to complete the transaction. There is a verification process that is completed at the time the caretaker swipes their card through the POS device. The POS transaction is sent to the Ohio ECC system for verification on the following items: case eligibility, child authorization, is the provider an authorized provider, and are there hours remaining within the category of authorization for that specific child. If all of these checks are confirmed, the transaction is approved. If any of these checks fail, the transaction is denied. There are many resources available to caretakers. There are posters that are displayed throughout the state for Ohio ECC. An early alert postcard is mailed to caretakers to notify them their card will be coming in the mail. A frequently asked questions flyer is included with the card. The card is attached to a card carrier and includes a tip sheet that helps the cardholder perform transactions. Additional resources will be discussed later in this presentation. This is an example of the early alert postcard sent to the caretaker in preparation for Ohio ECC. The early alert postcard and additional caretaker documents are provided in English and in Spanish. The Ohio ECC Caretaker FAQs is a frequently asked questions document that outlines important information for caretakers. This document is provided to all caretakers in the mailing when they receive their card. This is an example of the card carrier. This is the actual document that holds the caretaker swipe card and is sent in the mail. The plastic card is on an adhesive strip attached to the document, where you see the picture of the card shown here in red. The card carrier includes a tip sheet and responsibilities. In the box on the right, which is highlighted in red, there's an example of what that information looks like. The tip sheet and responsibilities portion of the card carrier states that the caretaker must activate their card and select a 4-digit PIN using the caretaker helpline. It reminds the caretaker that the provider is not allowed to perform check-in or check-out functions or to keep the card. It advises the caretaker to call the caretaker helpline if the card is lost, stolen, or damaged. And it advises the caretaker to continue to report any changes in case information to their child care caseworker. There are child ID numbers specific to each child that are printed on the card carrier mailed to the caretaker. The child ID numbers are highlighted in red on this slide. The same swipe card is used to report attendance for all children on the case. Each child has a unique 2-digit child ID. The parent must know the child ID number in order to report attendance for each child through the POS device. The tip sheet with instructions for reporting attendance is located on the detachable portion of the card carrier, highlighted in red on this slide. This portion of the carrier is designed to be carried by the caretaker to assist them when using the swipe card with the POS device. Parents are given this tip sheet for reporting attendance. Check-in and check-out functions are the most common attendance transactions caretakers will be entering on the POS device. When the child care services are received, each child must be checked in and checked out. Each check-in must be matched with a checkout. Now, if a check-in or a checkout is missed, a previous check-in or previous checkout is required. If a child has not been checked out, the child cannot be checked in again until a previous checkout occurs. This process is called a backswipe, and instructions are shown on the tip sheet. The backswipe period is the current week of service plus the previous 2 weeks. The week of service begins on Sunday and ends on Saturday. An unmatched check-in report, also called an exception report, is available from the POS device and also on the PWeb. An example of a set of backswipe transactions could include the following scenario. A child is transported to your program on your van at 7:30 a.m. The child then takes a school bus at 10 a.m. and returns to your program at 2 p.m. The caretaker only visits your program at 6 p.m. to pick the child up. The only time the card is available to be swiped is at 6 p.m. when the caretaker is there. This scenario would require 4 transactions to reflect the 2 windows of care provided at your program. At 6 p.m., the first transaction would be a previous check-in for the 7:30 a.m. arrival. The second transaction would be a previous check-out for the 10 a.m. departure when the child left your program. The third transaction would be a previous check-in reflected when the child returns at 2 p.m. And the final transaction would be a current checkout when the caretaker is picking up the child. Each transaction takes approximately 15 to 20 seconds for a total time of 1 to 2 minutes to accurately reflect the service provided for that day. There are additional resources available for caretakers, including a document titled 5 Things Caretakers Can Do to Prepare for Ohio ECC. There's also a caretaker online presentation that trains caretakers on how to swipe their card and complete attendance transactions using their provider's POS device. Providers are encouraged to remind caretakers to view the caretaker video. Caretakers should watch their mail, read the card carrier information, as well as the FAQs document included with the card. Caretakers should also activate their card and select their PIN number. Caretakers also have a helpline they can call for assistance. Caretakers use the caretaker helpline by calling 1-888-796-4322. The caretaker helpline is specific for caretakers. There is a different helpline available to providers. Caretakers use the caretaker helpline 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to activate their card, to change their PIN, to report lost, stolen, and damaged cards, and to request a replacement card. The caretaker has the option to speak to a customer service representative, available from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. Again, this helpline is specific to caretakers. Now let's talk about providers in Ohio ECC. If you are a new child care provider, that means that you've just been certified or licensed. You must complete an ODJFS provider agreement using the KIDS Provider Portal. Once a provider agreement is completed, the county can authorize an eligible child to your program. When the county authorizes a child to a provider, an ACS equipment agreement is mailed to that provider. A POS installation appointment is made, and a swipe card is sent to the caretaker. Providers should keep attendance records for any children in publicly funded child care until their POS is installed. After the POS installation, the caretaker will perform previous check-ins and previous checkouts for child care services provided before the POS was installed. The provider can submit manual claims for attendance that occurred before the back swipe period. The POS device shows a message on the screen when a caretaker swipes the card, and the message is either approved or denied. The POS will deny a transaction if there is no authorization. In the event a transaction is denied, the caretaker should contact a child care caseworker. Now, providers are encouraged to establish business practices to manage denied swipes in their program. The provider will use the point of service device to print daily transaction receipts, to void transactions, and to view broadcast messages on receipts. An example of a broadcast message might be, call your child care caseworker. A broadcast message can be sent to the provider from the County Department of Job and Family Services or from the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services. Providers also use the POS device to view and print reports and to ensure that store and forward transactions are sent. We'll talk about reports and store and forward next. The POS device can print 2 daily reports. There's a daily attendance report that shows all the transactions received for a specified date. There's also an exceptions report that shows the unmatched check-ins for a specified date. Check-in transactions for which there is no corresponding checkout transaction will appear on the exception report. The daily attendance and exception reports are available on the POS device for the previous 20 days. If the phone line or internet connection is interrupted, the POS device automatically enters a store and forward or SAF mode. When this happens, the POS will flash SAF on its display. When in store and forward mode, the POS will not display an approved or denied message when the card is swiped. It also will not print approved or denied on the POS receipt. However, the swipe transactions are still accepted and stored. When in SAF mode, caretakers should only enter an attendance transaction once. When the phone line or the internet connection is restored, the POS device automatically transmits all of those stored transactions. After all transactions have been sent, a report prints showing approved and denied swipes. The SAF period is the current day plus the 5 previous days. The POS device does require paper, which is provided at the time of the POS installation. For each provider location, the initial stock of paper includes, for Type A providers, 9 rolls. A center will receive 18 rolls. All other providers will receive 3 rolls. Thermal paper is used, so no ink is required. Additional paper can be purchased at most office supply stores. The POS device must have paper in the tray to work, even if the printing is turned off. There have been several resources developed for providers to assist in understanding the Ohio ECC system. An initial provider packet was mailed to all current providers. The first time a child is authorized to a new provider, the new provider is sent a packet that includes the equipment agreement and installation guidelines. At the time of installation, providers receive face-to-face training from the POS installer. Providers also receive a provider user manual. The Provider Frequently Asked Questions document was created to answer questions most commonly asked by providers about ECC. In addition, a quick reference card has been developed for providers to use to assist them with the everyday use of the POS device. There is also an online PWeb user manual developed for providers. An additional tool for providers titled 5 Things a Provider Can Do to Help Families Prepare for Ohio ECC has also been developed. There's a provider resource guide and the provider helpline. Before January 1st, 2012, provider webinars are scheduled to assist providers in getting a better understanding of Ohio ECC. These informational sessions, such as this one, last approximately 90 minutes. 40 to 50 webinars are scheduled and providers register online. An invitation is mailed to the providers that includes a webinar schedule, WebEx instructions, and the document titled Ohio ECC Point of Service Device, What Do I Need to Know? This is an example of the Quick Reference Card. This is a 2-sided card, which is a good document to place next to your POS device to assist you and the caretakers in using the POS device. This particular side is for the providers. You can see it says Provider Functions. For each function, The left-hand column shows the POS prompts, and the right-hand column lists the actions the provider takes to perform that function. The POS display steps the provider through each action. The other side of the quick reference card is specific to caretaker functions. For each function, the left-hand column shows the POS prompts, and the right-hand column lists the actions the caretaker follows to perform that function. The POS display steps the caretaker through each action. Providers are also given a frequently asked questions document which lists commonly asked questions and answers that are useful in learning about the Ohio ECC system. Providers use the provider helpline by calling 1-888-516-4776. As we discussed earlier, a different helpline is available to caretakers. The provider helpline is specific for providers and can be used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The IVR is used by providers to confirm attendance, void transactions, and report absences. The provider can also retrieve payment information, troubleshoot the POS device, and obtain PWeb support. Providers also have the option to speak to a customer service representative from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. A different helpline is available to caretakers. Providers are responsible to verify that parents receiving publicly funded child care are reporting attendance for every child entering or exiting the program. Providers are responsible to ensure that parents are swiping out any time the child leaves the program for any period of time, such as a doctor's appointment or periods between before and after school care. Providers should not take possession of or store parents' swipe cards. Providers should encourage parents to continue reporting changes to their child care caseworker. Providers are responsible to maintain the POS device properly and to report POS-related issues promptly to the provider helpline. And providers are responsible to continue compliance with all other program policies and reporting requirements. Providers have a lot to think about when it comes to Ohio ECC and the PWeb and how it works, and how it will be used within their business. These questions are meant to assist you in thinking about ways that your business practices may or may not need to be changed. These questions will not be answered during this presentation. They are intended to be questions you use within your program to make decisions about your program. Each provider may develop different business practices depending on what works best for their program. It's suggested that you review the printed copy of this slideshow presentation, including these questions, after you've had some time to think about all that has been presented today. Questions include, what will you do with a check-in or a checkout that is denied? How will you monitor daily swipes and unmatched check-ins? How will you inform parents who forget their card about the back swipe period? How will you use the POS receipts? How will you track attendance manually if parents do not have their cards? Will you print the available reports from the POS? On the PWeb system, topics to consider include, will you give the password to others in your program? How often will you log into the PWeb? What if you don't have an authorization showing on the PWeb? How will you use the reports available on the PWeb? For manual claims and adjustments, you need to consider what business practices you will use for the following situations. What processes will you put in place to submit manual claims for attendance? Submit adjustments to payments. Make forms available to families if needed. Keep copies for your records. How will you track payments from manual claims and adjustments? Only you can decide what business practices will fit your program. Next, we want to talk about POS installations. Media Writers, also called MRI, is a subcontractor for ACS. MRI is in charge of all the equipment installations. There's no cost to the provider for the installation of the POS device, for the initial paper supply, or for any training or resource materials given to the provider. However, the provider is responsible for establishing a communication connection for the POS device. This can either be an analog telephone line or a broadband internet connection. In order to learn more about the options for connecting the POS device, please refer to your installation guidelines and the POS document titled, "What Do I Need to Know?" Providers are responsible for the cost of any additional cabling or cords for installation. An installation technician from Media Writers will contact the provider to set up a date and time for the installation. MRI is scheduled to do installations in specific areas of the state on specific dates. While there is some flexibility in scheduling, providers must be able to schedule installations when Media Writers is in their area. Providers are also responsible for accommodating any language or special needs necessary for the Media Writers technician when the installer arrives. A typical on-site visit can last up to 1 hour. Providers may have others on their staff present for the training portion of the visit. Installers can only train on the POS device. They're not able to answer any policy or program-related questions. The technician and the provider will sign a checklist confirming that equipment installation and training have been completed. If the provider has questions, this is the perfect opportunity to ask those questions before signing the checklist that confirms training is complete. Here are some factors to consider in setting up your POS device. The first thing would be the method of communication. You have two options. The first option uses a regular dial-up telephone line, sometimes referred to as an analog line. The second option uses high-speed internet. This is sometimes called broadband, DSL, or cable internet. The other thing to consider is where you're going to place the POS device. Convenient locations would be places where children are dropped off or where the highest foot traffic occurs. The POS device should be installed in a safe location. There is an 8-foot, 3-pronged power cord that's provided with the POS device. Also, depending if you use the internet connection, there's a 6-foot Ethernet cable provided. Any additional customization, such as longer telephone or Ethernet cables, must be completed by the provider before the installation appointment. The first option is the dial-up option. The dial-up option is used when you have a simple, traditional analog telephone connection. This connection can be made through a wall jack or sometimes run through the back of a fax machine. If you want to run the connection through the back of your fax machine, the installer can provide a splitter so that the fax machine and the POS device can run off the same telephone connection. There are things you must consider if using a dial-up connection. The first thing would be if you have a multi-line telephone system at your location, which requires a user to press a line button in order to access an open line. This type of phone system cannot be used. You'll need a separate phone line or a broadband connection. The other factor to consider is whether your phone system requires a dial prefix where you press an 8 or a 9 to get an outside line. While most of these systems can still be used, you need to tell the MRI installer what prefix number is required. The installer will program the POS device to include that prefix. It takes about 20 seconds per transaction if you're using an analog or a dial-up connection. There's also the option to use the internet or a broadband connection. This is used when the high-speed broadband connection is available. Typically, connections can be found either on a wall data port or an open port on a hub or a router. These types of systems look very similar to the photos on this slide. Things to think about when you're planning to use an internet connection. First, you have to look to see if your internet has firewalls that would prohibit the use of the POS device on this type of broadband connection. If there are firewalls, you need to change those settings to allow the POS device to be installed. You also have to make sure you have available ports or jacks on your hub or router, and consider the number of POS devices you're going to have installed. If you're going to be using numerous POS devices, then you'll need to have numerous ports and jacks available to plug those individual POS devices into. Connection speed with the broadband is very fast. It's just a matter of seconds to complete a transaction. POS devices readily connect to most common internet services such as Time Warner, Comcast, Charter, Verizon, or AT&T with no additional steps. For providers with technology staff or other service providers, the information listed on this slide may be useful to them. Now we're going to discuss the provider website, referred to as PWeb. You'll see on your screen the web address for the PWeb. It's also listed in the provider user manual and the kids resource guide on the child care website. Here's some information about initially accessing the PWeb. The PWeb user ID will be the same user ID, or what we call the CCP number. That CCP number is used for the kids provider portal. This number was mailed to you when the provider portal first went live. It will be the same number to access both of these systems. If you don't have this number, contact the Kids Help Desk. The first time you log into the PWeb, your password will be your 5-digit zip code. After logging in, the next screen will require you to change that password to something new. You will not be able to keep the zip code as your password. A PWeb Quick Start Guide is included in the provider user manual you receive when your POS device is installed. The complete PWeb user manual can be viewed or downloaded from the PWeb login page. The PWeb system is primarily a view-only system. Here you'll be able to view your provider profile information. You'll also be able to see case and authorization information specific to children who are authorized to your program. Transaction and attendance information will be available to you on the PWeb. This is real-time information, so if the parent is standing at the POS device and swipes their card, that information is transmitted to Ohio ECC and you can view it immediately. You'll also be able to view, download, and print transaction reports, as well as report absent days on these screens. On the PWeb, you'll now have access to payment information down to the child level. This payment information can be viewed, downloaded, or printed. Now let's go to the web page. In the center of the screen are quite a few helpful links to important information and documents you can download, including the PWeb user manual, which will help you use this system. We strongly encourage you to use those links. The login box is located on the left center part of the screen, highlighted in red. These boxes are where you'll log in. You'll enter your user ID and your password, and then click on Login. Remember, your user ID will be your CCP number. If you don't have your CCP number, contact the Kids Help Desk. Your very first password will be your zip code. After entering your user ID and password, the P-Web system will require you to choose a new password and choose 2 security questions. This will happen the very first time you use P-Web. The password change screen requires you to enter your current password and enter your new password twice. This will confirm your entry. If you ever want to change your password again, the admin menu in the upper right corner of your screen allows you to display this screen again. The second screen you'll see when you first use the P-Web requires you to select 2 security questions from a list of 9 available questions. These questions include: in what city were you born? What's your mother's middle name? And so on. Choose 2 questions that you can easily answer. Answering these 2 questions allows you to reset your own password in the future if you ever lose or forget your password. You can also go back and change these questions and answers at a later time by choosing the Admin Menu User Profile option, which appears in the upper right corner of the screen. Each time you log in after changing your initial password and choosing your security questions, you'll be taken to this provider profile screen. Remember, the password change screen and the security question screen appear only the first time you log in. Before we talk about the provider page, the profile page, let's take a few minutes to look at the screen layout. The top portion of the screen is the same on every P-Web screen. In the upper left, you'll see ohio.gov, Ohio ECC. This is called the home area. You'll notice when you move your mouse, which is an arrow, to the home area, the arrow turns into a pointing hand. This indicates the area is a link which will take you somewhere. In this case, the link is the home page, which is also the provider profile page we're currently on. Whenever you're viewing the P-Web and you want to return to your provider profile home page, simply click on the ohio.gov, Ohio ECC home area, and you'll return to this page. The next area I'd like to point to is in the upper right corner of the screen and every P-Web screen. There's the logout button, which allows you to exit P-Web. And there's a menu area. In the P-Web, there are 2 menu options: Reports and Admin. You can choose any submenu item by clicking on that item, and we'll see that later on these screens. The other item that appears on all P-Web screens is the User Info box. This box simply shows your login name and how long you've been on the P-Web system. Now let's talk about the provider profile page. The provider profile screen shows information about you. This is your profile. It has your name, contact information, mailing address, physical address, and your POS device information. If your POS equipment has not yet been installed, this area will be empty. Otherwise, the POS information will show the date the POS was installed or deinstalled and the telephone number associated with that POS device. You'll do most of your navigation through the P-Web from this particular screen. Viewing authorizations about the children in your program and viewing transactions performed on the P-Web device is done by using the buttons on the bottom of the screen. Let's view authorizations. We'll click on the Authorizations button, and this will take us to the Authorization screen. The Authorization screen will show you the authorizations for children in your program. But before we talk about the authorization data, let's look at the ability to sort screen reports in the P-Web system. Many PWeb reports look just like this authorization report. We'll scroll to the authorization portion of this screen. The columns in each PWeb screen report can be sorted 3 different ways simply by clicking on any column heading. The first sort is alphabetically going up. By clicking on the column heading, we'll see an up arrow appear in the column heading. This indicates the sort is in increasing alphabetical order. The second sort is alphabetically going down. Again, clicking on the column heading, the sort arrow turns downward. This means that the list is now in decreasing alphabetical order. By clicking on a third time on the column heading, the arrow disappears and the sort is back to the original order on the original screen shown by PWeb. These sort features are available on most PWeb screen reports, including this authorization screen, transaction screens, and many other screen reports also have these same features. These sort features are very useful in searching and displaying information. Now let's look at the buttons on the authorization report. These buttons appear on most PWeb reports and are used to control pages, downloading, and filtering. There are 4 arrows followed by a drop-down box with a number in it. This number controls how many lines to display on each page. The arrows control how to go from page to page, or to the top of the list, or to the bottom of the list. In this example, the number is 20. So each page would contain 20 authorizations, and you would go from page 1 to page 2 by using the green arrows. You can change the number 20 to any other number in the drop-down box. The next 3 buttons are download buttons. These buttons allow you to take the list, in this case your authorizations, and download it to your computer. There are 3 download options. The first button is comma-separated value format. The second is Microsoft Excel spreadsheet format. And the third button is PDF format. Excel and PDF are the more common formats you'll probably use. The next 2 buttons are the filter buttons. The magnifying glass and the refresh buttons work with the empty boxes directly above each column heading. By clicking on the empty box above the heading, you can enter text that you want to filter, and with the refresh arrows, you can restore the original list. Now let's look at an example. We'll filter the authorization list for cases that only start with 60000. In the case number filter box, we'll enter 60000, and then we'll click on the magnifying glass. This will take our entire list of authorizations and filter only those that match our filter box. In our example, only 3 authorizations match, so this becomes our filtered list. We can also restore the list back to its original form by clicking on the refresh arrows. These are next to the magnifying glass. Now let's look at the authorization data itself. You'll see that the top portion of the screen is part of your profile information. The next portion of the screen will be the authorization report. There you'll see a list of authorizations for children authorized to your program. There's a case number, there's the child's name, and the last activity that's taken place for this child. You'll also see the type of transaction that took place, such as a check-in transaction, which is shown as in, and checkout transactions, which are shown as out. There is also absences, previous ins, and previous outs. On the authorization screen, you only see the last activity for that authorization. We'll see all the activity later when we look at the transaction screen. When looking at the authorization report, you can see the case number is in blue. The child's name is also a link. Because the case number is in blue, it indicates a link to another screen. These links work just like the home area link that we saw at the top of the page. All these links take you to another P-Web page. Let's look at the authorization profile for a specific child. We simply click on the child's name, and the link will take us to the authorization profile screen for that child. On the authorization profile screen, you'll see there's some case information listed at the top portion of the screen. There's also some demographic information. Then, under the authorization profile, are the authorizations for that specific child, both open and closed authorizations. You'll see the status and the start date and end date for each authorization. Each of these authorizations has a plus sign and an authorization number. The plus indicates that that line can be expanded to show more information. Clicking on the authorization number will expand it and show more detail. Clicking on it again will collapse that detail. We'll now expand it and look at what additional information is available to you. When expanded, the authorization shows important things, including the authorization category, as well as co-payments. You'll also be able to see the pay source code and some general information. The next screen that we're going to look at is the Record Absent Day screen. If you click on the Record Absence button in the authorization detail, P-Web will take you to this Record Absent Day screen. The top portion of the screen will continue to display the child's information and will show existing absent days. On this screen, you have two choices. You can either record an absent day, or you can void any absent days that are unsettled. Unsettled means the absence has been recorded but has not yet been processed. As long as the period has not been settled, you can void an absent day. For example, if you had mistakenly recorded an absent day for the wrong date, you have the option to void that entry. It would also add that absent day back to the total remaining balance. In this case, from 9 to 10. If we record an absent day on this screen, the absent day's remaining balance would decrease by 1 for each absence the provider enters. So in this example, adding an absent day would decrease the absent day's remaining balance from 9 to 8. Now these absences must be entered within the backswipe period. As we discussed earlier, the backswipe period is the amount of time you have to report absent transactions, and it's the period of time the caretaker has to enter previous check-in and checkout transactions. If an absence is unsettled, that means we're still within the backswipe period, and the absence can be voided. Remember, the backswipe period is the current week plus the previous 2 weeks. Once that status changes to settled, you can no longer void the absence. Reporting absences or making any other changes would have to be made through a manual process. I also want to call your attention to the blue buttons at the bottom of the screen. The system is very easy to navigate, and you can move from one screen to another very easily. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Details button, which takes you back to the provider profile. Or you can click on the case number at the top to get information on the case. Let's look at the case screen. By clicking on the case number, you'll see which appears in blue, you'll see that this is a link. And since it's a link, you can click on the case number and go directly to this case profile screen. One of the things that you'll see on the case profile screen that we haven't seen yet is a list of cardholders, including the cardholder's name and the status of each cardholder. In addition, you'll see children who are authorized and their current status. All children who have ever been authorized to the case are displayed with a status of either active or inactive. You'll also notice the child's name is blue, indicating this is a link. Clicking on the child's name will take you to the child's authorization screen we already reviewed earlier. Again, I'd like to draw your attention to the two buttons at the bottom of the screen. There's a Details button that takes you back to the provider profile screen, and there's a Transaction button that shows you transactions for this particular case. The difference between the Transaction button on this page and the Transaction button on the provider profile page is that this button gives you transactions for this case only. The Transaction button on the provider profile screen gives you all the transactions for all children in your program. The next screen we're going to look at is the Transaction Report. There are several screens where you see the Transaction button. Whenever you click on that Transaction button, you'll be taken to the Transaction Report screen. On transaction screens, you'll need to select a date range with a start date and an end date to display those transactions within that time period. The other option that you can use is to enter a specific case number to display transactions for a particular case. Transactions displayed on this report are swipe transactions performed by the caretaker and absent transactions entered by the providers. These transactions will show check-in and check-out activity, as well as previous check-in and previous check-out transactions. This report is useful for providers to see what activity has occurred for children in their care. Now let's take a look at the Reports menu. If you look at the top right corner of your screen, you'll see that there's a Reports link. When you move your mouse to the Reports link, you have the option to look at two different reports. The first is the Unmatched Check-in, Check-out report, and the second is the Provider Payment report. The Unmatched Check-in, Check-out report is similar to the Exception report that's available on the POS device. Unmatched check-ins are available to providers on both the POS device and in the PWeb. The second report you'll see is the Provider Payment report, and that's specific information about settlement to the provider. The Provider Payment report will only include information for time periods that have been settled or processed by ODJFS so that the provider can be paid. The report that we'll see is the Exceptions report. There are two versions of this report. One for today and one for the previous 10 days. This report will show the provider all unmatched transactions. An unmatched transaction is a check-in transaction with a missing checkout. Caretakers must complete the missing checkout for the provider to be paid for that period of service. This report helps the provider monitor transaction activity to ensure each check-in has a corresponding checkout. It's suggested providers look at these reports daily to ensure that parents are swiping their child's attendance correctly. For example, in the red box, each child has a check-in transaction, but no matching checkout transaction. Therefore, the provider may not be paid until a checkout occurs. Once the parent completes a corresponding checkout, the transaction will be matched and automatically removed from this report. Since each attendance period must have a check-in and checkout transaction, caretakers cannot complete any additional check-in transactions until a checkout transaction is completed. Parents need to complete these check-in and checkout transactions before the end of the back swipe period. This report will help you identify unmatched transactions so that you can alert parents to complete a matching checkout. Now let's look at at the provider payment report. A payment report is created for every payment made to a provider. That payment report is listed by the payment date in a drop-down box. To view that report, simply click on the drop-down arrow and select the date you want to review. Click on the Search button and the Provider Payment Detail Report will be displayed. The Provider Payment Detail Report will include your provider information. You'll also see the date period you selected and the settlement date. For each child and the payment amount for that child will be listed as a separate line individually. As part of the total, you'll see if there were any provider-level adjustments made to the payment, and finally the total amount paid. With this new screen, you can now get more detail about the individual child payment and how the total is calculated by clicking on the total listed for each specific child listed. Once again, we see the total for each child is shown in blue, which indicates that item is a link and an additional screen is available by clicking on that link. On the payment detail screen, clicking on any child's total will link us to the child payment detail screen. This child payment detail screen includes authorization information, such as copay amount, rate determination information, additional factors such as special needs amounts, and any fees that pertain to that payment. The detail screen will look something like this. It will have the person's information at the top. You'll see the weekly attendance hours and the authorization category for full-time, part-time, greater than full-time, or less than part-time. You'll see any absent days that were included in the calculation. Also shown on this screen will be any customary or ceiling rate which was used. You'll see the age category for the child, the rate, and several other factors that are part of the calculation of that payment. You'll also see whether there are any waivers, including, if any, non-traditional amounts, and any adjustments that have been made to that particular child payment. All of that information will be included on this detail screen to show you how the calculation was made. This concludes our demonstration of the PWEB. We'd like to discuss the time frames for the ECC rollout now. But first, we'd like to remind you that you can submit questions at any point by clicking on the question mark in your WebEx toolbar. We only have a few slides left in the presentation, and we encourage you to ask any question you may have before we end the presentation. Here's some information about the Ohio ECC rollout. It's really important for providers to understand that they are considered to be part of the pilot if they have any children authorized by a pilot county, regardless of the location of your program. The initial pilot counties began using the Ohio ECC system on August 28th, including Champaign, Logan, Marion, Ross, and Union counties. On October 30th, providers serving Hamilton County were scheduled to begin using the system. On January 1st, all providers statewide will begin using Ohio ECC. There are a lot of resources available to you if you need assistance in understanding Ohio ECC, including the resource guide available on the KIDS website. We've included on this slide some important telephone numbers that you might need. The first is the caretaker helpline used to activate their card. Select a PIN number, report lost, stolen, or damaged cards, or speak with a customer service representative. The provider helpline is used by you, the provider, if you have POS-related questions or problems, and PWEB-related questions. You would also use that same helpline in order to access automated information available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The next number you have is the KIDS Help Desk number. You'll dial option 1 for provider-related issues such as payment, 1099s, or general questions. We've included our email address if you have general questions or need assistance. If you have other questions after this presentation ends, you can mail them to this email address, and your questions will be answered on the Child Care website. Finally, you have our Child Care website, where the community has access to considerable information about child care in Ohio, including Ohio ECC. For the convenience of providers and caretakers, all materials discussed during this presentation are available by clicking the Kids button located on the Child Care website listed on this slide. This is also the location where answers to questions received during these provider webinars will be posted. This concludes the Ohio ECC provider webinar. A survey will appear following this screen in about 2 minutes. Your input would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for attending.